What if I told you that somewhere in the Nevada desert, 12 elite military operators experienced something that defied reality itself? A classified incident so profound it left them with identical brain patterns and knowledge of technology that shouldn't exist. In the summer of 2009, deep in one of America's most secretive testing grounds, a special forces training exercise turned into something far more sinister. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the best of the best, drawn from Army Special Forces, Air Force Special Tactics, and Marine Force Recon. Men trained to face any situation, but nothing could have prepared them for what happened that night. But here's where it gets even stranger. While these men were having their shared vision, military radar tracked multiple objects moving at Mach 15, that's over 11,000 miles per hour, performing maneuvers that should be physically impossible. The kind of speeds that turn metal to plasma, yet these objects moved with precision that makes our most advanced aircraft look like toys. What happened to these soldiers in that isolated patch of desert? Why did the government rush to cover it up? And most disturbing of all, what kind of technology could implant identical knowledge into 12 different minds simultaneously? This is the story they never wanted you to know.
Secrets of the Woods.
I've spent most of my adult life under strict non-disclosure obligations, working for units that officially do not exist, so you can imagine why this is difficult. However, I'm now at a point in my life, fully retired, living under the radar, few connections left, where I feel compelled to at least leave a record of what happened. Maybe someone else will come forward with corroborating details, or maybe it will just be another story that vanishes into the blogosphere. Either way, I need to get it off my chest. I served in a special forces unit that specialized in high desert operations, among other things. Our training often took place in remote corners of the American Southwest. This particular incident occurred in the summer of 2009. I won't specify the exact month due to ongoing confidentiality concerns, during a multi-branch training exercise in the Nevada desert. Typically, these exercises involved a combination of survival training and direct action drills in harsh environments, things like infiltration and exfiltration under extreme conditions. The official cover story for the location was that we were practicing advanced desert warfare maneuvers, but in reality, we were also testing out some new gear and technology integrations. Let me set the scene a bit. Our Forward Operating Base, FOB, was a small outpost built around a pre-existing airstrip, likely constructed sometime in the 1950s or 60s. It wasn't one of the well-known places like Nellis or Creech or Tonopah. It was basically a hidden patch of tarmac in the middle of nowhere, ringed by chain-link fencing, watchtowers, and a scattering of Quonset huts for living quarters. If you pulled it up on Google Earth back then, you'd see just brown desert, maybe a faint airstrip outline if you looked close. No official name. We called it the Depot or Outpost 22, though neither was probably the real name. We had a 12-person team drawn from different units, 4 Army Special Forces guys, 4 from an Air Force Special Tactics squadron, and 4 from a specialized Marine reconnaissance outfit, Force Recon or MARSOC. We'd all been operating together for about 3 weeks at that point, running daily drills, night infiltration exercises, parachute jumps, and other standard fare. The environment was brutally hot during the day, 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and surprisingly cool at night. The desert had a haunting beauty, especially after sunset when the sky turned pitch black and the stars looked close enough to grab. What struck me about that deployment was the constant sense of tension in the air, and I don't just mean the typical stress of training. There were rumors swirling among some of the older guys that this particular region of Nevada was prime territory for strange sightings, unexplained craft, weird electromagnetic disturbances, that sort of thing. Normally, I dismiss that talk as chatter, but the scuttlebutt was louder than usual. Even some of the local base personnel hinted that we might see weird stuff out there. I remember shrugging it off until the night it actually happened. Let me give you the broad overview first. Our entire 12-person unit encountered a temporal anomaly. Yes, that sounds insane, but that's the best phrase I can come up with to describe the event. During a late-night training mission, we collectively experienced a 15-minute period of shared consciousness, during which we apparently gained knowledge, technical knowledge, of something that none of us had studied before. In the days that followed, the base security logs revealed multiple radar contacts moving at impossible speeds, Mach 15 if you can believe it, that correlated exactly with the time of our experience. After we all returned to the main facility for medical checkups, it was discovered that we developed identical, unusual brainwave patterns during sleep. That's the short version. Now let me take you through the details. We were 3 weeks into a 4-week block of training. The schedule for that night involved a desert navigation exercise using a mixture of old-school land nav techniques, map, compass, pace count, and some new GPS-based tracking technology that was being tested for possible future use. We were broken into 3 teams of 4, each assigned a different route that spanned about 15 miles of rough desert terrain. The objective was to move quietly, gather intel on enemy positions, which were simulated by training cadres, and rendezvous at a designated waypoint. We stepped off at around 2200 hours, 10 p.m. The temperature had dropped to a tolerable level, maybe in the low 80s. The desert floor was illuminated by a waxing moon, giving us decent visibility. Our gear included night vision goggles, NVGs, standard rifles for training, sidearms, and small rucks with water and minimal supplies. The night started normally. My team, call sign Raven Team, moved east. The other 2 teams, call signs Falcon and Viper, moved north and south, respectively. We maintained radio comms every hour, short check-ins to confirm position and status, no issues. It was around midnight that I first noticed something off about the sky. The moonlight seemed flickery, almost as if thin clouds were passing overhead, but the horizon looked clear, no clouds in sight. I figured maybe it was heat waves or dust in the atmosphere. Over the next 20 minutes, the flicker got worse. My teammates saw it too. It was like a faint strobe effect in the sky, impossible to pinpoint. At 0030, we got a comm check from Viper Team. They sounded odd, hesitant. Their team leader asked if we were seeing anything weird with the sky. I replied that we were noticing some kind of flicker. He just said, "Roger that, keep your eyes peeled." Then the line went quiet. It was unusual for them to be that vague, especially in an official radio exchange. By 0100, Raven Team was about 8 or so miles from the FOB, near a rock formation that was one of our nav checkpoints. We paused there to confirm coordinates. That's when everything changed. I'll try to describe it exactly as I experienced it. The air got incredibly still, like all wind and ambient noise disappeared. Usually you'd hear insects or the rustle of brush, but it went silent. The sky's flicker intensified, then there was a kind of shimmering in my peripheral vision, like waves of distortion, almost the way heat rises off pavement, but enveloping the entire desert around us. The next thing I knew, I felt a pop in my ears, like a sudden change in pressure and an overwhelming wave of dizziness. I guess I blacked out momentarily because my next conscious thought was hearing one of my teammates exclaim something like, "What the? Did anyone feel that?" I realized I was on one knee, trying not to collapse. All 4 of us looked at each other, stunned. Our watches were all glitching, digital readouts flickering, analog watches had their second hands spinning. One guy, let's call him Cooper, was yelling into his radio, but it was dead static. Another teammate, Grant, tried the backup radio, same result. Then I noticed the environment around us looked dim, like the moonlight had faded, but the moon was still there in the sky, only it appeared slightly out of place. I don't know how else to say it. The moon looked bigger, maybe closer, or the shape of the horizon had changed. My sense of orientation felt scrambled, like we'd been teleported or something. That's when the real strangeness began. I started having these rapid-fire thoughts, images and formulas flashing in my mind. It felt like someone was beaming technical schematics directly into my brain. Equations, shapes of engine components, designs for what looked like some futuristic propulsion system. I've never studied advanced aerospace engineering, but suddenly, I was visualizing what I can only describe as an anti-gravity drive, or something akin to it. I glanced at my teammates, and I could tell from their expressions that they were experiencing something similar. We were all reeling, eyes wide, occasionally gasping. It was like a mental slideshow we couldn't shut off. At that point, time lost all meaning. I couldn't tell if seconds or minutes were passing. I later learned that the entire episode lasted about 15 minutes, though it felt both longer and shorter, like we were suspended in a bubble of unreality. Cooper said he felt an intense heat in his head, as if his brain was on fire from the inside. I had the same sensation, a throbbing ache behind my eyes. Despite the pain, there was also a strange euphoria, like we were on the verge of a monumental discovery. Suddenly, I heard a faint roaring sound overhead. I looked up to see a streak of light crossing the sky, moving impossibly fast, leaving behind a faint blue-green glow. Another streak followed, then another. They seemed to be weaving around each other, forming patterns that defied normal aeronautics. I recall one of my teammates screaming that they were seeing more lights behind us. We spun around, glimpsing at least 3 or 4 more luminous objects zipping across the horizon. Some soared so high they resembled meteors. Others swooped down near the desert floor, leaving trails of sparks or glowing dust. It was like the entire sky had become a stage for hyper-advanced craft. During these 15 minutes, our 4-man team was connected in a way that's hard to convey. I could sense not just my own thoughts, but snatches of my teammates' thoughts as well. It was as though we were mentally linked. For example, I'd see an image of a particular device or a formula in my mind, and then Cooper would shout, "I'm seeing it too." Grant, or the other guy, I'll call him Davis, would nod in amazement. It wasn't telepathy in the sense of hearing direct words, but more a shared stream of concepts and visuals. To be clear, none of us had any pre-existing ability like that, nor had we used psychoactive substances. We were stone cold sober, mid-training. And yet, there we were, collectively absorbing technical knowledge about something that seemed well beyond contemporary human engineering. I remember vividly a blueprint-like image of a toroidal ring spinning within a gravitational field. I recognized no frames of reference for it, but somehow I understood aspects of how it functioned, like it was a zero-point energy or inertial dampening system. All of us seemed to be experiencing versions of the same mental data dump, each focusing on slightly different pieces. When we tried to communicate verbally, shouting in the night air, our words got jumbled. It was easier to rely on that ephemeral mental link, which only made the situation more surreal. At some point, the strobe-like flicker in the sky intensified again. My next clear memory is hearing a loud crack, like thunder, and then I woke up face first in the desert sand. The immediate sense was that maybe a few seconds had passed, but looking at my watch, now functioning again, I realized it was 0150. A solid 15 minutes had elapsed since the initial wave, maybe more. The environment felt normal again, cicadas chirping, the wind rustling. The moon was back to its usual size or position. My headache was still there but receding. we scrambled to check on each other, physically and mentally. No one seemed seriously hurt, though we all looked dazed. Then the radio crackled. It was Viper Team, frantically calling for a sitrep, situation report. We answered, and they asked if we'd felt it. I replied that we had. They said they'd experienced something similar, shared visions, time distortion, and had also seen lights in the sky. Over the next few minutes, we got in touch with Falcon Team, who confirmed they'd had the same anomaly. Their description matched ours almost exactly, down to the mental downloads of advanced technology. The training exercise was effectively over. A command radioed from the fob which instructed all personnel to report back immediately. Things were getting hairier by the minute. The tone in the radio messages was urgent and uncharacteristically alarmed, which told me that something big had happened, and it wasn't just us. We made the 8-mile trek back in near silence, each lost in our own thoughts. My mind was racing with glimpses of propulsion systems, anti-gravity fields, and partial formulas I couldn't fully decipher. All I knew was that they felt real, like knowledge that had been forcibly downloaded and might vanish if I didn't cling to it. We arrived at the fob around dawn. The atmosphere was tense. Base personnel were running around, checking equipment, shouting orders. Our commanding officer looked pale. He ordered us to stow our gear and report to the medical tent for immediate checkups. Typically, after a training op, we might do a brief after-action report, but this time, they rushed us straight into medical. Each of us got a full battery of tests, EKGs, blood work, neurological reflex checks, that kind of thing. While we were waiting, I overheard some staff talking about radar logs and multiple contacts, though they clammed up when they realized I could hear them. One by one, we cycled through the medical exam. The docs looked at each other with concern, but didn't explain what they found. Afterwards, we were told to get some rest in the Quonset huts, but not to leave the base or speak to anyone outside our chain of command. Essentially, we were in lockdown. For the rest of that day, the entire 12-person team was in a bizarre state, anxious, exhausted, and yet mentally buzzing with that strange knowledge. It wasn't until the following evening that I managed to speak privately with a radar technician who'd been on duty the night before. He was an acquaintance from earlier in the training cycle. Let's call him Frank. Frank confessed that the base's radar systems went haywire during the exact window we experienced the anomaly. They picked up multiple fast-moving objects, some traveling upwards of Mach 15 at altitudes ranging from near ground level to several tens of thousands of feet. These craft perform maneuvers no standard aircraft could replicate: sharp right-angle turns, sudden stops, accelerations to Mach 15, then decelerations to subsonic speeds. Frank said that the official line from higher-ups was that it had to be a software glitch or a meteor shower, but no one in the radar room believed that for a second. The chatter among the techs was that they'd witnessed proof of something extraordinary, possibly experimental aircraft from a classified program or something not of this Earth. Frank also mentioned that the objects seemed to converge in the general region where our team was operating. It was as if the phenomenon, whatever it was, centered around us or near us. I asked Frank if there was any mention of time discrepancies in the logs. Maybe the radar stamps were out of sync. He just gave me a nervous look and said, "You didn't hear this from me, but yeah, the timestamps jumped. Some of the radar data showed negative time intervals." That was all he would say before excusing himself. On the third day after the incident, we were summoned to a formal debrief in a makeshift conference room near the base's command center. All 12 of us, plus the commanding officer, plus some civilians I didn't recognize, likely intelligence or scientific personnel. They asked us to describe our experiences in detail. We tried to explain the mental downloads, the shared visions, the illusions in the sky. The civilians seemed intensely interested, taking notes, occasionally exchanging glances. One of them asked very pointed questions about the propulsion designs we saw. Did we recall specific shapes, angles, or sequences of numbers? We did the best we could, but it was like trying to describe a half-remembered dream. Some images were crystal clear, others faded. All of us insisted that we'd never studied advanced aerospace engineering. So how could we possibly have these designs in our heads? One civilian, I'll call him Dr. Gray, suggested we might have been exposed to a mimetic device or information field, which was nonsense to me at the time. I'd never heard terms like that, but he was speaking as if such things existed, like weapons or tools that could implant knowledge. We were then told, politely but firmly, not to discuss the incident with anyone outside the group. The official story to the rest of the base personnel would be that we'd encountered a localized atmospheric event causing disorientation and mild hallucinations. That's it. The subject was declared classified. They even made us sign additional NDAs on top of the ones we already had in place. Over the next couple of days, they subjected us to more tests, this time specifically neurological. We each spent a night hooked up to EEG machines, electroencephalograms, during sleep. The morning after, the medical staff seemed agitated. They told us everything was fine, but you could see in their faces that it wasn't. One nurse slipped up and said, "It's so weird that you all have the same patterns." She clammed up immediately, but the damage was done. We overheard enough to gather that our brainwave patterns were not only unusual, but identical across all 12 team members. By that point, we were a mixture of nervous, angry, and confused. The Marine Recon guys were especially frustrated, feeling like we were guinea pigs. The Air Force contingent was spooked, suspecting we'd stumbled onto some top-secret technology. My own Army SF buddies oscillated between excitement over the knowledge we glimpsed and dread over the potential consequences. In the breaks between tests, we'd gather in hushed conversations, trying to compare mental notes about the propulsion designs. Each of us had pieces of the puzzle, but no one had the full blueprint. It was as if whatever force or field we encountered had deliberately scattered the data among us. Around day 5 post-incident, rumors reached us that an unnamed higher authority was flying in to interview us personally. Some speculated it was someone from the Department of Defense. Others whispered it could be from a 3-letter agency or even a private contractor. We never got to find out. The day before that rumored visit, we were abruptly told our training was complete and that we'd be shipped out separately back to our home stations. Usually, there's a formal closeout for a joint exercise, but not this time. It was as if the entire operation was shut down in a hurry. We parted ways without fanfare, no group photos, no farewell barbecue. Each sub-team left in a different transport at different times. None of us had a chance to do a final group discussion. It felt like an intentional tactic to prevent us from cross-pollinating our recollections. We were scattered to the winds. In the weeks following, I had intense dreams, like I was back in that desert under the flickering sky, with images of swirling rings and magnetized fields swirling in my head. Some nights, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, half convinced I was still out there. I also experienced a persistent ringing in my ears for nearly a month, something no ENT specialist could explain away. A few phone calls to my buddies confirmed that many of them were going through the same thing. Bizarre dreams, persistent migraines or ear ringing, a sense that we'd been psychologically tampered with. One guy confided that he tried to replicate some of the equations he'd seen in his visions, scribbling them down in a notebook. He said it felt almost like channeling, that once he got going, the numbers flowed. But after a few days, he burned the notebook, spooked by what he was writing. He told me the stuff he was producing looked like advanced quantum mechanics, something he'd never studied. He was worried he might attract unwanted attention if it fell into the wrong hands. Now, over the years, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Possibility 1. We stumbled onto a black budget test of some exotic technology that can induce shared hallucinations or telepathic illusions. The US military, or some private contractor, might be decades ahead of what we publicly know, and maybe we were unwitting participants in a large-scale test. But that doesn't account for the radar returns of Mach 15 craft, unless those craft were also part of the demonstration. It also doesn't fully explain how we'd all share the same dreamlike knowledge of advanced propulsion, nor the bizarre time distortion. Possibility 2. We encountered a phenomenon not of human origin. Could it have been an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional event that latched onto our group? The sense of downloads we experienced might be akin to close encounter cases where witnesses report telepathic messages or sudden expertise in fields they never studied. The craft on radar could have been UFOs, triggered by our presence or curiosity about our training exercise. Possibility 3. A natural phenomenon. Some kind of temporal vortex or geophysical anomaly in that portion of the desert. This is the least satisfying explanation to me because of the coherent technical knowledge we received, which doesn't sound like a random glitch in Earth's magnetic field. Also, the identical EEG patterns strongly suggest an external influence shaping our neural activity. Regardless, the immediate official reaction was to clamp down and hush it all up. That implies that at some level, the powers that be are aware that such events can occur, or at least that they've happened before. Otherwise, why scramble to bury it so quickly? You might ask why I'm risking telling this now. Partly it's because I've reached a stage in life where I feel I have little to lose. My family is protected, I have financial stability, and I believe it's important that these events become part of the larger conversation. If enough people speak up, maybe we'll reach a tipping point where the truth can't be buried. That said, I'm still cautious. I'm leaving out specific coordinates, real names, and certain operational details to protect both myself and the others. This isn't the first time I've tried to hint at what happened. I once approached a journalist I trusted with a sanitized version of the story. They told me it was compelling, but ultimately too out there to publish without hard evidence. Radar tapes, official documents, test results. Of course, I don't have any of that. The only proof is in the memory of 12 individuals, exercises, whatever is others from old friends who reached out privately after hearing whispers of my experience. I'm not presenting these as ironclad truths, just relaying what was told to me in hopes it helps paint a broader picture of the strange things happening out there. One story I heard came from an Army transportation specialist I'll call T. He and his unit were tasked with hauling supplies, nothing classified, just routine equipment, from one remote base to another across the Nevada test ranges. This involved long stretches of desert highways, often driven at night to avoid daytime heat. T told me that on at least 2 separate occasions, his convoy encountered what looked like another military convoy heading in the opposite direction. It would appear out of nowhere on the desert road, complete with headlights and even the faint glow of what looked like taillights at the rear. As they approached, they'd get a sense of radio static, like someone was trying to broadcast on a secured channel. But there'd be no voice, just white noise. The weird part is that each time, the convoy seemed to vanish the moment T's lead vehicle got within a couple of 100 yards. The entire line of trucks or APCs, he couldn't be sure exactly what they were, would simply fade out, as if swallowed by the desert night. The first time, they wrote it off as an optical illusion or mirage. The second time, T said he distinctly saw figures in the driver's seats, shadowy silhouettes wearing helmets. When they reported it, their commanding officer just shrugged and told them not to worry. That strange stuff happens out there. T eventually started calling it the Phantom Convoy. He also mentioned that near the spot of these sightings, you can sometimes find partial tire tracks in the dust, tracks that begin and end abruptly, leading nowhere. He suspected these sightings might be echoes from some past operation, or perhaps linked to top-secret testing that projected decoys. But in the back of his mind, T wondered if it was something more supernatural or interdimensional, especially given that the second time he saw it, his watch was off by about 10 minutes afterward. That time slip was never explained. Another contact, an Air Force Security Forces NCO I'll refer to as K, swore up and down. There's an underground facility connected to the same desert region where my team's anomaly took place. K's job occasionally involved perimeter patrols around certain fenced-off areas, typically hush-hush sections of the base rumored to house advanced aircraft. On one patrol, Kay and a partner noticed an unfamiliar gravel road they hadn't seen before, branching off from a main access route. They followed it for a couple of miles until it dead-ended at a hillside that looked suspiciously like an artificial embankment. No signage, no lights, just an unmarked gate in the side of the hill. Kay described it as a metallic door about 15 feet wide and 10 feet tall, partially camouflaged with desert paint. They tried radioing in to ask if anyone knew about this entrance, but their comms went haywire, garbled transmissions, static bursts. They decided to note it and head back, figuring it was above their pay grade. A day later, they returned to the same area, intending to log coordinates, except the gravel road was gone. No sign of it, as if it had been bulldozed or expertly re-landscaped overnight. The hillside also looked different, lacking the door. Kay said it was as though the desert swallowed it up. He asked around discreetly, but everyone claimed ignorance, including higher-ups who typically know the base layout. A friend in base engineering supposedly told him that some specialized rapid concealment techniques existed, like inflatable or collapsible entryways that could be disguised quickly. But the friend also hinted at something more advanced than that. Kay eventually dropped it, worried about repercussions. He admitted he never saw people entering or leaving that door, but he was certain it was more than a simple storeroom. Given what my team went through, it makes me wonder if advanced facilities in that region might be experimenting with reality manipulation tech. The ability to hide an entrance overnight could be a small piece of a bigger puzzle. A Marine friend, R, shared a creepy incident from a nighttime shift in a watchtower overlooking part of the perimeter. Not the exact same base as mine, but supposedly a related facility in the same desert complex. R said that around 300, he saw a figure approach the fence line. The figure appeared human, wearing what looked like a dark flight suit and some kind of helmet. R called down to the ground patrol via radio, but no one else could see the figure on their thermal scope, even though R was staring right at it. It stood there motionless, about 20 yards from the fence. R tried to zoom in with binoculars and claimed the figure's face was just a black void, no features visible. Then out of nowhere, the figure glided. He insists it didn't walk, several yards to the left, still outside the fence. Alarmed, R turned on the tower spotlight. The figure instantly blinked out, like flipping a switch to blackness. R scrambled to find it again, scanning the desert, but it was gone. Yet the fence sensors triggered as if someone had crossed. Ground patrol found nothing, no footprints, no disturbance. The next day, R filled out an incident report. His superior officer told him essentially, "Forget it, that's not your concern." R didn't connect it to anything interdimensional until he read my initial email, the one you posted. Now he wonders if the figure could have been tied to the same phenomenon, some being or advanced tech that can slip in and out of our reality. Or maybe it was a highly classified infiltration test using stealth suits. Either way, R said the sense of dread he felt was unlike anything else in his years of service. This next one came from two Navy techs, C and M, who were temporarily assigned for communication support at a joint training site, likely within the same desert range. They claimed they were out late calibrating some portable antenna arrays in a hilly region close to the base. At around 2300 hours, they both noticed a faint glowing ring hovering about a foot off the ground in a narrow ravine. It was about 3 to 4 feet in diameter, swirling with bluish-white light. C wanted to investigate, but M felt an immediate sense of danger, insisting they stay back. They observed it from roughly 50 yards away for a few minutes. It made no sound, yet seemed to churn the air around it. Small pebbles and dust floated upward toward the ring. Then, without warning, a coyote bounded out from behind a rock and ran straight into the glowing ring. The animal's front half vanished, followed by the rest of its body as though it passed through a doorway. C and M freaked out. They watched the ring fluctuate, then abruptly collapse into itself, leaving no trace. The coyote was never seen again. They reported the event to their immediate supervisor, who told them to keep quiet and stop telling ghost stories. Yet M insisted what they saw was real, a literal portal. To this day, C wonders if that ring was the same kind of gateway that might have messed with my team's perception of time. He notes that, interestingly, the portable antenna arrays started picking up bizarre frequency spikes at the same moment the ring appeared, though the data logs were apparently confiscated by senior staff. Another buddy of mine, an Air Force pilot I'll label A, claims he was part of a test flight involving a specialized sensor pod designed to detect anomalies, electromagnetic, thermal, etc. A told me this was a hush-hush mission, flying over the desert region at night, maybe 25,000 feet altitude. Partway through, they picked up odd readings, huge spikes in the IR infrared spectrum, centered around ground locations that should have been empty desert. As they circled back to get a closer look, A saw, through the sensor display, a large glowing object embedded in the desert floor. It was shaped vaguely like a tetrahedron, maybe 30 feet on a side. It was not visible to the naked eye, only the IR sensors picked it up. The glow pulsed at intervals of about 5 seconds. A relayed this to the flight controller, who told him to change course and not to approach. After landing, A was debriefed by unidentified personnel who asked detailed questions about the shape, the pulses, and whether A experienced any dizziness or hallucinations. A asked if it was some known installation or a downed craft. The men simply repeated that it was classified. A suspects it might be an underground structure or artifact that occasionally becomes active, emitting energy. The next day, the mission data tapes were removed from his aircraft by these unidentified men. He never saw the readouts again. Interestingly, this alleged location is within 40 miles of my team's anomaly site. If some ancient or advanced artifact lies beneath the desert, maybe it's triggering all these weird phenomena, time distortions, portals, strange sightings, etc. Two separate folks, an Army sniper and a Marine Recon specialist, told me of a labyrinth of caves in certain desert foothills not far from where our training took place. Both said that when they ventured inside, one was during a survival exercise, the other during a cave recon, they heard a low-frequency resonance or hum that permeated the rock. It could be felt in the chest like a subwoofer. One described a phenomenon where, after a few minutes inside, your mind feels fuzzy, as though time slows down. The other said they found bizarre symbols painted on the cave walls, geometric shapes and spirals, unlike typical Native American art. They photographed them, but the images apparently turned out distorted with data corruption. They later learned of rumors that these caves connect to a vast underground network rumored to house classified research. Whether the humming is some natural acoustic effect or related to secret installations, I don't know. But these cave stories line up with the sense of electromagnetic or gravitational strangeness in the region. It's almost as if the entire area is riddled with hotspots where normal physics can bend or be manipulated. Time slips, disappearing objects, portals, underground entrances, advanced or hidden structures, and high-speed craft. It all suggests there's a deeper layer of activity in these deserts than conventional military training. Some might be top-secret human tech, some might be phenomenon that defies our current scientific understanding, and some could be a fusion of both, where hidden research attempts to harness naturally occurring anomalies. From what I can tell, these stories span at least 2 decades. The region is large, covering multiple test ranges and forbidden zones. There are countless smaller outposts, bunkers, and backdoor facilities scattered across the desert, and each one could be working on a different slice of the puzzle: high-speed propulsion, electromagnetic cloaking, temporal research, even interdimensional gates, if that's what these portals truly are. What does the military, or whoever's in charge, ultimately want? Possibly to weaponize or control these anomalies. Or maybe they're just studying them to understand how they function. The official stance, of course, is silence. When low-level personnel like me or my acquaintances stumble onto these oddities, the reaction is either a threat or a dismissive, "You didn't see anything." That's standard procedure for protecting sensitive programs, but in these cases, the level of weirdness goes far beyond normal secrecy. Could it be that our temporal anomaly incident was triggered by the same underlying forces behind the Phantom Convoy, the ring portal that swallowed the Coyote, or the hidden tetrahedron glowing under IR? I tend to think so. If there's some overarching phenomenon, call it a crack in reality, or a localized convergence of electromagnetic fields, then all these stories might be offshoots of that. And if the government or some shadow group has partial knowledge of it, they'd be highly motivated to keep it under wraps while they probe its capabilities. Now, I want to circle back around to my original incident. The other major piece of evidence is the EEG data from our post-incident sleep studies. All 12 of us had identical anomalies, some kind of rhythmic pattern that didn't match normal human sleep cycles. The nurse who slipped up mentioned it was like spikes of synchronous activity across all the lobes. Another snippet I overheard was that it shouldn't be possible for them to be so uniform across 12 individuals. This led me to wonder if our brains were still, in some capacity, connected or resonating at a frequency we had tapped into during that 15-minute window. I never got an official readout of my own EEG. They wouldn't let me see it. But the hush-hush behavior from the medical staff made it clear that this was not normal. None of us were asked to do follow-up scans, which is odd if they truly wanted to understand what happened to us. So either they already knew or they didn't want to keep a paper trail. Possibly both. I keep calling it a temporal anomaly because we had blackouts, there were radar timestamps out of sequence, and it felt like something manipulated the normal flow of time. One theory I've considered is that we were pulled into a small pocket of shifted reality, or maybe we collectively perceived time differently for that period. Another angle is that the advanced craft themselves were generating a field that caused these effects. Some advanced gravitational or space-time manipulation device might explain the speeds, the shared mental phenomena, and the glitchy clocks. Still, it's all speculation. Without official data, it's guesswork. But the odd feeling that we lost time or that time was warped remains. Each of us recalled the start of the anomaly at slightly different times, but we all agreed it lasted about 15 minutes in total. My estimate is that we shaved off nearly an hour of hiking time. That's not normal for heavily loaded troops traveling at night, especially in rough terrain. It's as if time compressed, or we covered more distance in less clock time. I apologize for this being so long, but I'll end on some interesting connections and I'll let you draw your own conclusions. First, there was a string of cattle mutilations reported around that same time frame, about 30 miles north of our exercise area. Local ranchers claimed they found cattle with precise incisions, drained blood, the classic UFO lore. At the time, I dismissed it as nonsense or coyotes, but given what happened to us, I now wonder if there was a broader pattern of high strangeness in the region. Second, there were rumors on base about a large craft being recovered or tested in a hangar out on the far side of the airstrip, an area we were never allowed to access. A buddy of mine, also in Special Forces, said he glimpsed a giant disc-shaped silhouette through a partially open hangar door one night. That was about a week before our anomaly. Again, could be hearsay, but I'm including it for completeness. Maybe we were training in an area that had already seen otherworldly or advanced technology. Third, during our time at the FOB, there were several references to Project Gatepost in overheard conversations. I asked around but got nothing but blank stares or nervous shrugs. Could be a code name for something entirely unrelated, or it might tie into what we experienced. I've never found any reference to it in open source materials. So here we are, nearly a decade and a half later, and I'm still grappling with this. I often wonder if our entire group was selected for some reason. Maybe we possessed certain psychological profiles or neurological predispositions. Or maybe we were just random victims of an external phenomenon that happened to intersect with our training exercise. In either case, the biggest takeaway for me is that we, as humans, really have no idea how reality might be shaped or manipulated by advanced intelligences or advanced technology. I sometimes find myself toying with the idea that we glimpsed the future. Those propulsion systems we downloaded might be how humanity travels in the centuries to come, or maybe they're in use right now by factions we're not privy to. The uniform EEG patterns suggest that we were forcibly linked in a group mind for a short period, gleaning a puzzle piece of knowledge. Perhaps the objects we saw at Mach 15 were scanning us or uploading data into us for reasons unknown. People might read this and label me a conspiracy theorist or a fabulist. That's fine. I don't have a smoking gun. But I do have my testimony, the corroborations from the other 11 men, and the knowledge that something truly impossible occurred out there. It changed me. I used to be a strict materialist. If I couldn't see or measure it, I didn't believe it. Now, I'm open to the idea that our reality is far more fluid than we think, and that advanced technologies, whether human-made or otherwise, can bend space-time and consciousness in ways that defy ordinary logic. If you guys enjoyed today's stories, be sure to smack that like and subscribe button so you don't ever miss another episode of Secrets of the Woods. I'll see you all in the next episode.